The woman who would destroy Seo-rin's family did not arrive at the Yi estate with an army or a weapon in her hand. She arrived with nothing more than a gentle smile. Her name was Myeon. She was beautiful and graceful, carrying herself with the quiet elegance expected of a noble lady. She knew exactly when to lower her eyes, when to speak with gentle humility, and when silence would serve her better than words. To everyone who met her, she appeared kind, modest, and refined. Behind that gentle smile, however, hid a heart as cold as winter itself. Her arrival at the Yi estate was no coincidence. Several ambitious nobles had carefully chosen her because they believed Yi Jun possessed a weakness they could never exploit with gold alone. They could not buy his loyalty, but they could feed his pride. At first, Yi Jun refused. Even so, the desire that had taken root within his heart refused to disappear. The weeks passed, yet the same thoughts continued to weigh upon him. The position he longed for still seemed just beyond his reach, and the recognition he craved always belonged to someone else. No matter how much wealth surrounded him or how many people praised his accomplishments, he still felt as though he stood beneath those who had inherited noble titles and ancient family names. Little by little, his hunger for status consumed him. One evening, he returned home wearing the same determined expression that Seo-rin had come to recognize. This time, however, he had not come to ask for her understanding, nor had he come to seek her approval. His decision had already been made. Seo-rin looked at the man standing before her, the man she had loved for more than a decade. For a brief moment, despite everything that had changed between them, her heart still remembered the person he used to be. She remembered the young, government official she had believed in from the very beginning. She remembered the man who had promised that her love alone would always be enough. She remembered the father who had once cradled their newborn daughter in his arms and sworn that he would spend his life protecting them both. Somewhere deep inside her, she still hoped that man had not completely disappeared. She reached for him one final time. Gently, she reminded him of the life they had built together, of the daughter who adored him beyond words, and of the promise he had made beneath the cherry tree that no other woman would ever enter their home as his wife. Her words no longer reached him. Yi Jun had already convinced himself that this was the price of greatness. In a calm voice, he told her that his decision was final. The woman had already been chosen, the arrangements had already been made, and nothing she said could change what was about to happen. Seo-rin simply looked at him in silence. For the first time, she realized she was no longer trying to convince her husband. She was mourning the man he used to be. The following morning, the entire household began preparing for the arrival of a new member, a woman whose presence would forever alter the fate of the Yi family. A few weeks later, Myeon entered the Yi estate as Yi Jun's concubine. Despite the pain in her heart, Seo-rin welcomed her with dignity. She refused to humiliate another woman because of her husband's decision. She personally assigned Myeon comfortable living quarters, instructed the servants to treat her with courtesy and respect, and continued managing the household with the same grace she had always shown. Myeon accepted every kindness with perfect manners. Then, the moment Seo-rin turned her back, she smiled. It was not the smile of a grateful guest. It was the smile of someone who had already begun counting another woman's home as her own. Months passed. Before long, Myeon announced that she was carrying Yi Jun's child, and the entire estate celebrated the joyful news. Yi Jun could barely contain his excitement. When the day finally arrived, Myeon gave birth to healthy twins, a son named Junseo and a daughter named Sunhee. From that moment onward, the balance within the household quietly began to change. Jun spent more and more of his evenings in Myeon's residence instead of Seo-rin's, the cherry tree that had once echoed with laughter, and happy conversations gradually fell silent. Each evening, little Yoonha would wait patiently at the dinner table before asking whether her father would be joining them. Seo-rin always answered with the same gentle smile, telling her daughter that he was simply busy with his responsibilities at the palace. She never allowed Yoon-ha to witness the tears she cried after everyone else had gone to sleep. Meanwhile, Mi-yeon wasted no time tightening her grip over the estate. She whispered carefully chosen lies into Yi-jun's ear. She claimed that Seo-rin secretly looked down upon her, accused the senior servants of mistreating the twins, and even suggested that Yoon-ha deliberately ignored her younger brother and sister. None of it was true, yet lies repeated often enough have a way of becoming believable. Little by little, Yi-jun stopped asking questions. Instead, he accepted everything Mi-yeon told him without doubt. The years passed. Yoon-ha grew into a bright and gentle young girl whose kindness reminded everyone of her mother Jun-seo, inherited his mother's ambition, and learned from an early age that power was something to seize rather than earn. Sun-hee mastered the art of appearing sweet and innocent while quietly supporting every scheme her mother devised. By the time Yoon-ha reached the age of 11, the household no longer resembled the warm and loving home she remembered. She and Seo-rin ate their meals alone. Jun dined with Mi-yeon and the twins. The loyal servants who had once adored Seo-rin gradually disappeared, replaced one by one with people whose loyalty belonged entirely to Mi-yeon. With every passing season, the warmth that had once filled the estate slowly faded away. One afternoon, while the children played together in the garden, Sun-hee deliberately shoved Eun-ha down a flight of stone steps. The young girl tumbled painfully to the ground, scraping both her hands and bruising her shoulder. Before Eun-ha could even climb back to her feet, Sun-hee burst into loud tears and accused her older sister of trying to push her instead. Mi-yeon hurried over at once, pulling her daughter into a protective embrace while crying that Yoon-ha had become jealous of the twins. Moments later, Yi-jun arrived, without asking a single question, without trying to discover what had truly happened. He looked only at the child who cried the loudest. Yoon-ha struggled to explain through trembling sobs. Seo-rin stepped forward as well, pleading with her husband to listen to their daughter before passing judgment. Yi-jun silenced them both. In a cold voice, he declared that Yoon-ha must apologize. Immediately, the little girl lifted her tear-filled eyes toward her father and quietly whispered that she had done nothing wrong. Yi-jun turned away. For the first time in her young life, he walked past his own daughter without offering her a single word of comfort. That night, Seo-rin sat beside Eun-ha's bed, carefully applying medicine to the bruises covering her small arms. As she gently brushed her daughter's long black hair, she sang the familiar lullaby she had been singing ever since the day Eun-ha was born. Half asleep, Yoon-ha looked up at her mother and asked the one question Seo-rin had feared more than any other. "Mother, does father not love me anymore?" Seo-rin's hand became perfectly still. In that instant, her heart shattered. Even so, she smiled through her tears, kissed her daughter's forehead, and softly promised that no matter what happened, her mother would always protect her, even if it cost her everything. Outside the room, hidden within the shadows of the corridor, Mi-yeon listened to every word. A slow smile spread across her face. She had already begun preparing the trap that would destroy both mother and daughter, and that trap would be waiting for them inside the imperial palace. Spring arrived, bringing with it the season of celebration. Across the capital, noble families prepared for the imperial flower banquet, the grand gathering held each year within the palace gardens, where the emperor welcomed his officials and their families to celebrate the beauty of the season. For 11-year-old Yoon-ha, it was the happiest day she could remember. She had spent weeks practicing palace etiquette under her mother's patient guidance, carefully memorizing every bow, every greeting, and every proper gesture. More than anything, she wanted to make both of her parents proud. Before they left for the palace, Seo-rin adjusted her daughter's hanbok one final time. Then she gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind Yoon-ha's ear and reminded her that kindness would always outshine beauty. She never imagined those would be the last peaceful words she would ever speak to her daughter. The palace gardens were alive with thousands of blooming flowers. Children laughed beside the lotus ponds while musicians filled the air with gentle melodies, creating an atmosphere of joy throughout the celebration. Even Yi Jun appeared unusually cheerful that morning. His recent promotion had elevated him among the empire's most respected officials, and ministers who had once overlooked him now greeted him with admiration. Only Myeon watched the festivities with different intentions. Hidden inside the sleeve of her robe rested a small pouch filled with powdered herbs, a poison capable of causing temporary unconsciousness. In small amounts, it appeared harmless. In the hands of someone clever, however, it became the perfect weapon. As servants moved throughout the gardens preparing refreshments, Myeon quietly slipped away from the crowd. She waited patiently until no one was watching before approaching the young crown prince, who stood alone admiring the koi swimming beneath a stone bridge. Pretending to stumble, she offered him a sweet cake lightly dusted with the powdered poison. The prince accepted it without suspicion. Only moments later, his vision began to blur. Before he could call for help, Myeon shoved him into the lotus pond. The sound of the splash echoed across the gardens. Panic erupted instantly. At that very moment, Eunha heard the cries for help. Without stopping to think of her own safety, she threw herself into the water. Though she was still only a child, she fought her way through the pond with desperate determination until she reached the unconscious prince. Gathering every ounce of strength she possessed, she struggled to pull him toward the shore. Just as the palace guards rushed forward, Myeon screamed. Pointing directly at Eunha, she cried out that the girl had pushed the crown prince into the pond. Soon he and Junseo immediately burst into tears, insisting that they had witnessed everything with their own eyes. Several servants, who had been bribed days earlier, fell to their knees and repeated the very same accusation. Within moments, one carefully crafted lie became accepted as truth. The unconscious prince could not speak in defense of the girl who had actually saved his life. The poison kept him from waking. When the imperial physician examined him, he solemnly informed the emperor that the crown prince had fallen into a deep coma. He warned that there was a chance the young prince might never open his eyes again. Silence swept across the palace grounds. Slowly, the emperor rose from his throne. His face had grown pale with fury. Looking directly at the frightened little girl kneeling before him, his voice thundered throughout the courtyard as he demanded to know why she had attempted to murder the future of the empire. Eunha burst into tears. Again and again, she shook her head, crying that she had only tried to save him. Her small voice disappeared beneath the storm of accusations surrounding her. The emperor's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword. Blinded by grief and rage, he ordered the palace guards to execute the child immediately. Steel slid from its scabbard. The guards stepped forward. Eunha closed her eyes. Then, before the blades could reach her, someone threw herself between the swords and the little girl. It was Seo-rin. She fell to her knees before the emperor, pressing her forehead against the cold stone floor as tears streamed down her face. She begged him to spare her daughter's life, declaring with unwavering conviction that Eunha was innocent.